Hello, everyone. We'll give folks a minute to file in here and we'll get started in just 1 minute. Welcome to today's webinar. All right, hello, everyone. We're just giving folks a minute for the attendees to all get in. We'll be starting in just a sec. All right, I'll get us kicked off here. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Lacey Shaver, and I am Director of U.S. Clean Energy at the World Resources Institute's Polsky Center for the Global Energy Transition. I'd love to welcome you today to our webinar, which is entitled, "The Time is Now: How and Why Local Governments Should Shape the Energy Systems of the Future." This is the first in a series of webinars on a topic that could not be more timely in the United States as we experience rapid shifts in our energy systems. Next slide, please. If this is your first WRI webinar, welcome. We are a global nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization working to improve people's lives, protect nature, and halt climate change. We have a team of around 2,000 staff in 13 offices around the world working on topics like energy, water, forests, cities, food, and transportation. Next slide. We have a great agenda for y'all today. I'm going to kick us off with some framing to explain why now. Then I will be joined by some amazing expert speakers to share why local governments must get involved in state and regional energy systems decisions and the risks of inaction, followed by local government perspectives from two very different regions of the country. Finally, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end before we wrap up and provide some ways that you can get involved. A note on logistics: due to the number of people on the line today, we're going to be using the Q&A function of Zoom. So please drop any questions into the Q&A box. We'll answer some as we go, and then we'll answer some live. So I mentioned we have some great speakers today. I am joined by Bill Eager, founder and principal of Ethos Sustainability, Katie O'Neill, Energy Program Manager from the city of Boise, Idaho, and Heather Bullock, Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer from the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. We'll introduce them a little bit more as we go along. So let's dive in. Why now? We entitled this webinar, "Why Now?" So we figured we'd start with the now. Next slide. Recent years have brought a number of shifts and shocks for energy systems here in the US and worldwide. Load growth, federal policy changes, geopolitical conflict dynamics, tariffs, and market cycles are all causing a highly uncertain future for the electricity system. In particular, energy load is growing rapidly. The exact scale and impact of this growth are a major source of uncertainty in itself. The chart we have here on the left comes from BNEF, and it shows the various estimates of load growth from data centers alone by 2030. You can see that these curves, they all go up, but there's a great deal of variation in where these projections might go. Next slide. This expected rapid load growth is creating challenges for an aging grid and for consumers, including local governments and the residents that they serve. The sources and scale of load growth vary a lot by region, as you can see in this map on the right from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. So you can see a little bit what might be driving load growth in your particular region. Virginia, Georgia, Texas, the Southwest, these are areas that are experiencing massive growth in data centers, while Ohio, Michigan, and the Carolinas are seeing new reshored manufacturing raising demand. Finally, residential and transportation electrification are playing a large role in markets like California, New York, and New England. So even if the demand drivers are a little bit different regionally, that demand is rising across the country. Next slide. Alongside load, electricity prices are also rising rapidly. Consumer electricity bills have seen increases in recent years, and they are projected to keep rising. This chart on the right from the US Energy Information Administration shows that the average retail price of electricity has risen almost 30% nationwide since just 2020. And more rate increases are coming already. So this is a really major trend. Um, Increased load threatens to push market prices higher, and that can also require costly new infrastructure. For example, the recent capacity market auctions in PJM, the wholesale market operator in the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest, has broken records for the last 2 years. A recent study by the PJM Market Monitor found that forecasted load growth from data centers contributed to a $9.4 billion increase in capacity market revenue in 2024. Many of those costs will be passed along to ratepayers. And many ratepayers cannot actually afford these increased energy bills. The US Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey showed that last year, more than 1 in 4 Americans, 80 million people, reduced or went without basic expenses such as food or medicine in the last year in order to pay an energy bill. So this is a really major trend and something we need to keep an eye on closely. Next slide. One way that we can quickly and affordably meet this growing demand is to scale renewable energy and clean energy, including wind, solar, and battery storage, and to update transmission lines with advanced technologies to make them more efficient. However, 2025 has brought a shifting policy landscape, which threatens to make the cost of all generation assets, not just clean energy, but all generation assets and infrastructure build out more expensive. Policy barriers to renewables are many, but they can include permitting barriers, federal funding reductions, and cuts to clean energy tax incentives. Princeton had found that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act would cut cumulative clean energy investment by $500 billion between 2025 and 2035, while Rhodium analysis showed that new clean power generating capacity reduced by 53 to 59% by 2035 from the tax credit cuts. This all just means less and more costly new electricity. Next slide. So against this backdrop, state and regional energy system decision makers like utilities, public utility commissioners, state legislators and policymakers, wholesale market operators, they are facing numerous decision points right now, this year, and in the coming years. These decisions, like the decision points on the right here, utility planning processes, procurement requirements, performance incentives, the ways that utilities can recover their costs and rate mechanisms, clean energy access programs for large buyers and for communities, the structure and function of existing power markets and transmission planning. Decisions are being made on all of these topics right now, and they will influence the generation resources procured, their locations, the prices paid. These decisions will also influence economic development, resilience, and the health outcomes of our communities for the future. So they're really major decisions. And right now, they are being predominantly made by a small group of energy industry stakeholders with limited engagement and input from the broader public. Next slide. As these decision makers contemplate their trade-offs and make decisions that influence reliability, affordability, clean energy, economic growth, equity, and transparency, they need to hear from and consider the perspectives of those who will be impacted by the outcomes of their decisions. And local governments really have a unique ability to raise and amplify local perspectives and impacts. And local government voices are needed right now more than ever to ensure that the energy system decisions being made reflect community needs and priorities. And that is what we're here to talk about. My next slide is actually a poll. We would love to hear from all of you on the line who do work for local governments about your primary motivators for your local government to pursue engagement in energy system decision making and with public utility commissioners on some of the topics that I just mentioned. We understand that local governments have a lot of different goals, and each local government might have different drivers for why they are coming to this webinar today in this space. But we would love to hear from you. What are those top 3 different goals or motivators that are driving your work here. We are probably not going to share all of these live. We'll share the answers in our follow-up, but I can report out right now that we're hearing a lot of the top choices are achieving clean energy and sustainability goals and ensuring affordable energy for local government and community are by far the two highest, with then resilience and grid reliability coming in as third. Gonna give you another, let's say 20 seconds to fill out your answers. All right, we're slowing down, so I think we can end the poll now. And the winner was achieving clean energy and sustainability goals, followed by ensuring affordable energy. All right, so now I am going to hand the mic over to Bill Eager, colleague and partner of WRI. Bill is the founder and principal of Ethos Sustainability. He works with local governments, businesses, and organizations to advance comprehensive energy transition. Prior to founding Ethos, Bill served over 18 years in senior and executive energy, sustainability, and climate action leadership in local governments in Virginia and Ohio, most recently with Arlington County. He's led strategy and served as an expert witness in 11 regulatory cases spanning electric, natural gas, and water utility rate, net metering, transportation, electrification, and transmission cases. So Bill, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us why local government should get involved.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lacey, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you for sharing the background on the many challenges we're facing, relative to our energy systems, not only today, but that of the future, and really setting the stage for, why now is an important time for our local governments to engage in state and regional energy decision-making processes. So, thank you for all joining us today, and we look forward to a great discussion. So before turning to, learn the experiences for some of my colleagues, which we'll introduce here in a moment, those from cities of Boise and Charlotte, for the next few minutes, I want to provide an overview and make a case for, why is it important for local governments to engage in opportunities around decision-making of our current and future energy systems, and I will particularly just focus on regulatory and utility engagement to advance your local government and community priorities. So we recognize, and before we get any further, we recognize the uniqueness of each local government, state, be it policy framework or regulatory framework, differences in utilities across each of our states and within our states, but we share a lot of what those local governments seeking to, take systems level approaches to advancing, their community climate action efforts or efforts in meeting community clean energy, sustainability, affordability, reliability, equity, safety, and many other energy related parts. This is right now is the time, and there's a compelling case for why you are uniquely positioned and local governments are uniquely positioned to be part of this decision-making process. So with the next slide, please. So local governments alone in our communities can be one of the largest single users of energy resources in a community, and when added up across a region or a state, really are responsible for a considerable amount of energy resource use, electricity, natural gas, or otherwise. Be it for your offices, in civic centers or in civic areas of civic engagement, police and fire stations, community centers, health clinics, water and wastewater treatment. We could go through a whole number of ways that you operate services and the electricity and energy that consume is part and parcel in a large portion of your total community's energy use, and you're just basically bottom line large energy users unto yourself. What's uniquely also, though, is you aggregate and you have the ability to represent the needs of your community. We've heard kind of the needs of energy affordability is a challenge, reliability, sustainability, equity, clean energy, transparency. These are goals that each of your communities need kind of affect, have need for to change, and frankly, just given as Lacey said, a small number of decision makers make many consequential decisions on these large energy decisions, it is an opportunity for local governments to stand up, step forward, and represent the needs of your broader community's interests and goals. It's also to say that you have a tremendous impact on energy decisions just in the context of local policy making, be it land use decisions for new buildings, new developments, or otherwise, or economic development. The decisions made at the local level abstract up and accrue up to driving many of these larger energy use and energy decisions that you aren't necessarily party to. It kind of as they abstract and are aggregated up. It's also to say that bottom line is that those decisions are tightly linked to our broader energy system and our energy future, and so the local governments and communities are consequential to these outcomes. It's also to say that many aspects of thriving communities relate to the decisions being made relative to kind of energy systems that we use. Again, whether it be affordability, whether it be advancing public health outcomes, and just bottom line, the overall experience of our communities, whether it be lighting or just the goods and services and experiences that we enjoy, do have some relationship to the choices and the decisions that are being made relative to broader energy systems that serve our communities. I mean, but also to say that critically, public safety is a necessary kind of component of related to energy, and it's should not be lost in any local government public servant or civil servant here that when the power goes out, for example, who's the first to respond, and that's always the public safety, police, fire, EMS. And public works in order to provide critical safety and security services to our community in the times of energy outages and disruptions until utility services are restored. It's also to say that local governments operate, critical infrastructure, whether it be 911 call centers, whether it be broader communications platforms, whether it be water and wastewater provision. These are core critical infrastructure services, and all of them are impacted by these broader decisions that are being made in states and regional decision-making processes. We're also the host, or local governments and communities are the host of energy infrastructure. It obviously wires down the streets or transformers, substations, transmission infrastructure, even generation, conventional or otherwise, and that of our future kind of energy systems to include microgrids and solar plus battery storage. These are all fundamental kind of components of the decisions that are being made, and they are resident within our local communities, and yet in many ways we may or may not be party to the decisions making driving how those systems operate or are built, operated, or otherwise. And then I just want to say finally, listen, for many of our local governments, and you noted in the first poll of today's discussion, meeting our sustainability, climate action, or energy transition goals, it is not lost on us. And bottom line, that the decisions about the future of our energy systems that directly impact are the clean renewable energy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, high performance buildings, electrification of our buildings or transportation are resident within the policy and regulatory environment of each one of our states and considerations of our utilities. Next slide, please. But as noted, I'll state the obvious. Decisions around the future of our energy systems, those are and the valuable perspectives of many of our local communities, our local governments. They are critical, but they are non-existent, or at least they're I would say minimal in many cases that we find that the voice of local communities isn't often heard, and either special interest or a small number of decision makers are party to deciding the future of how our energy systems look, feel, or otherwise. And frankly, the local perspective, again, be that a local government, local community, are overlooked or honestly inaccurately addressed in many cases. And that, has numerous different implications. And I'll just note a few here, that includes, just insufficient planning for our future, be it just in infrastructure alone or consideration of how electricity or other energy resources are generated or provided, really miss the mark in meeting local community needs and again, interests. And it's really just also an opportunity and kind of a missed opportunity just to say that is to hold accountability high for our utilities, our state policymakers, and our regulators when it comes to the decisions they're making around our energy future. Next slide, please. Say it's important to share as we talk about the why local governments contribute an important and critical voice here in decision making across our states and regions. We want to just to say, at least to live a little bit of like, what is the universe? What are the numerous avenues for which to engage in these decisions, and and the ways that local governments might think about in the future to come and bring their voice, their interests, their needs these decision processes. And this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, and each state or region may have all or a subset of many of these types of decisions underway or availed to them. But bottom line is that there's numerous ways that we think that bringing the critical, unique, and important voice of local governments and their communities to bear reflects the priorities we've previously stated, again, of affordability, reliability, safety, et cetera, in each one of these types of engagement opportunities. And in future webinars, as Lacey noted, over the horizon of kind of the webinar series, we'll be diving into the ways that you as local governments have the opportunity either directly to involve yourself in decision making in a formal or manner, or even wielding soft powers or use of partners to be able to communicate the needs and interests of local governments and their broader community interests. And so this is just meant as a kind of starting point to say there is a huge opportunity, and we'll hear from some of our colleagues here in a moment about ways that they've engaged in some of these opportunities themselves. But again, leveraging or stating that in the future we'll be going through each one of these more of in a tactical and strategic way of ways to advance your interests and needs. Next, please. So, what holds many local governments back when it comes to engaging in these broader energy decisions and energy processes? And I just want to say, I want to draw upon my own experience, over the years engaging in public utility commission cases or in engaging in state policy advocacy or writing bills, or I've had the opportunity to work kind of with leaders at PJM or with FERC, and I just want to say that we hear not only in that experience, but then through WRI and engaging with many cities across the United States as of recent, hearing what are some of the barriers that are experienced, and I think many of these might resonate with you. There's really, in many cases, at least we hear there's uncertain needs of direct benefits when it comes to your city or community, that really doesn't allow you to sell kind of the opportunity to your city or county executives, to your city councils, your county boards, kind of really on what is the benefit of such engagement, and really, even selling to city or county attorneys who are part and parcel with many of these opportunities to engage, and also just aligning with your city strategic goals. There's a really kind of an uncertainty of how that all comes together to be able to sell the opportunity and to really move forward and get the support to move forward and engaging in these processes. It's also to say that you have a lot of priorities as local governments, and that's only becoming much more challenging, much more significant as we find that there's significant pivots in federal policy and investment in our local communities. The local governments are taking on more and more service delivery across a whole swath of different responsibilities against public service or human services, social services, public safety, and climate action and energy transition and sustainability. So it's not lost on us that there are challenges with your time, resources, just even your attention to be able to engage in these activities, and given all of the priorities that local governments and communities are now faced with. It's also to say there's challenges, the real and sometimes perceived fears of political risk, and kind of what are the challenges with potential for utility backlash. We also find that there's hesitations, to go it alone in cases, and not really unsure how to approach some of the engagement in public utility cases or with utilities when it comes to building coalitions or partnerships to bring kind of a partner voice to many of these conversations. Frankly, it's also to say that when it comes to these energy decisions, it's not lost on us. These are complex issues, and there is a significant need for capacity building and developing expertise within your local governments or on behalf of your local governments. And so this webinar and our future webinars and many resources from other organizations really come to bear to help we hope, overcome those barriers now and into the future. But it is not lost on us that these are significantly complex opportunities or complex issues that you have to overcome and build capacity and expertise around. And, it's also to say that there's challenges in distilling a lot of this to these complex issues to your peers, to again selling to your local government, the leadership, also to many in your community to articulate the benefits. And then it's really sometimes there's not a clear or well understood role for local governments, and we find that as a barrier as well. And finally, just to say, there's cases before utility commission or when you're talking about state policy or engagement with the utility, frankly, the information it's voluminous. That there's tremendous amount of information and there's tremendous amount of detail and so that just to say that just adds to additional complexity. So as we're cognizant of these challenges, and this is again one first step, a step in moving forward to helping you, local governments, overcome these barriers to advance your work in engaging in these critical energy decision-making opportunities. So before we turn to hearing from our colleagues on their experiences, engaging in state policy or regulatory, you have two questions for you, and we'll pose up the first question here, and that is to say, in what ways have you currently or have in the past, as a local government, participated in your state's public utility commission cases or energy regulatory proceedings, or frankly, anything else that have you've engaged in to advance your priorities and perspectives with, again, these energy decision-making processes. We'll give it about, I think, maybe 30 more seconds. It looks like we're slowing down here, so we'll go ahead and conclude this poll. We have a second poll. Let's see here. Yeah, we have a second poll. And then regarding challenges, what are the biggest challenges you face as local government leaders in securing buy-in from your elected leaders, executive leadership, or attorneys, and engaging in public utilities commission cases? And here again, we'll give about 30 more seconds. Well, just looking at the poll results here, there's a lot of different uh, responses and priority, reasons and barriers, prioritizing other city goals, some related to complexity of the issues, time and resource constraints for sure, fear of political risk and utility backlash is high. Okay, we give it just a few more seconds. And again, we'll be sharing the details of the results here in our follow-up email after the webinar. Okay, if you could close the results. And next slide. So listen, there's local governments have a critical role. There are many barriers and challenges to overcome in this body of work and engaging in state and regional energy decisions. But there is a precedent for engagement. And before we get to our sharing, two examples of that from our colleagues here in the United States, it's just to say that local governments have a long history of engaging in energy decisions, whether you know that or not. Frankly, again, your policy making around land use and economic development, and frankly, going back to when, our electricity systems started to emerge in our communities back in the turn of the century, 1900s, 1800s, all the way up through the expansion of electrification in the 1940s. Be it streetlights, be it expansion of electric services for commercial activity, frankly, for electric transit and trolleys. Local governments have had a long history in this body of work, and I think it's just to say that it's not without there is precedent over almost 100 years for where local governments, in some way, shape, or form, have been part and parcel with engaging in these important decisions. And we find that as these opportunities arise for public utilities commissions, state policy environments, it's already an opportunity to continue that work. And there's a growing number of local governments who are doing so. I spent a significant amount of time in the likes of Virginia and Ohio, and I have colleagues not only in the Commonwealth but across the United States that I've observed doing this work of engagement. Significant work in California and Colorado. We'll hear from Boise, Atlanta, and the broader Georgia community. There's just a tremendous amount of local government expertise and engagement in these opportunities to learn from and to carry forward and to give as an example and use as a resource as many of your local governments consider regulatory and utility engagement. And there's also just growing opportunities for coalitions. We see coalitions now forming in states of Georgia and Colorado, in California and Virginia, and then also kind of across regions with the PJM Cities and Communities Coalition and similar types of organizations in kind of the Midwest and the Northeast. There are local governments coming together to do this work, not independently, but together and to wield a collective voice. And then finally, just to say, there's just increasing levels of resources available to support this body of work and to further expand the capacity of and expertise amongst our local government ranks. WRI, Regulatory Assistance Project, Sustainable FERC, Power Lines, RMI, and there's just a universe of others that can offer opportunities and support for many of your communities over time. So over the course of the webinar series and then through other avenues, we look to bring forward some of those resources to help support your growth and overcome your barriers in local governments, organizations to engage in this work. So with that said, we're going to now transition to hear more kind of specific examples where this work is being conducted. And I invite my colleagues from Boise, Idaho, and Charlotte to join us. And let me pull up a little more information on each of our colleagues here. And I'm going to start with, Heather Bollock is the Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer at the City of Charlotte. She leads a cross-organizational team tasked with a strategic plan to help the city reach the goal to be a zero carbon city by 2050. Recent highlights include negotiating a green tariff for an 80 megawatt solar energy project, which is anticipated to offset 100% of carbon emissions from electricity for electricity used by city-owned buildings. Heather's experience includes energy management, institutional buildings, residential energy auditing, supervising a workforce development program in the energy sector, and managing a neighborhood energy grant program. And thank you for joining us today, Heather. And next up is trying to find. Here we go. Sorry. Katie O'Neill is a Boise native returning home after time in Paris. She is the city's energy program manager, working in the climate action team in public works. She has a master's in environmental engineering from Stanford University and a background in project management, and most recently working for the green tech startup in Paris and providing biodegradable microencapsulation solutions to eliminate microplastic pollution. Katie's expertise is in energy policy, carbon credit and greenhouse gas emission counting, and utility regulation. Katie lives in Boise with her husband and two kids, ages 4 and 1, as well as has a rescue dog. To challenge themselves before leaving Europe, the family recently hiked hut to hut in the Dolomites, and her hobbies include running in watercolor painting and discussing Boise's energy future. So for tonight, Katie, why don't you start? I'd love to hear and maybe share with our local government communities, what brought Boise to really work in the context of engaging with your utility and your Public Utilities Commission to advance many priorities that are important to Boise, including clean energy affordability and energy efficiency, reliability. And what outcomes have you seen, and how have you sold this body of work to your internal leadership?
Okay, well, okay. You might have to remind me about some of these questions as I go through, but thank you, Bill, and thank you to Bill and Lacey and Jen for having me. For a tiny bit of context, Boise, we're a small town. Well, we're growing. We have about 250,000 people, and we have one municipal utility provider. It's an investor-owned utility, Idaho Power. And historically, we haven't collaborated a lot with them, but over the last 10 years, we've sort of tried to collaborate more in areas of mutual interest. For us, that's been really helpful when we, in 2018, developed our climate action roadmap. So this is a place where we can sort of coalesce. Like, I don't have to do so much selling to leadership because it was approved by council. It's on City Hall. It says carbon neutral by 2050. So that's something where, like, we always try to engage if it has one of three goals in mind. And for us, that's our city clean energy goals. If it's going to affect our city billing, so like we are, as you mentioned, like a large electricity user, and so if something's going to affect that, then we try to engage or intervene. And then there is no residential ratepayer advocate entity in Idaho. So that's something that the city takes sort of a role as a representative for our constituents. And that's mostly for like rate cases. And like as like a little bit of background, I guess I loved your slide where you said like all the places that you could engage with the utility, because that's something that I think we do really well in Boise, where we engage in the very formal setting of like a public utility commission rate case, or like an IRP like forecast for energy usage in the future. But we also like recently collaborated with our utility provider on free home energy audits for residents. And that's something that we're putting in our newsletter, and the residents can go and they can get a home energy audit from the utility provider, and the city's helping pay for a portion of that cost. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities, and it doesn't have to be necessarily like all very formal utility legal intervention. I think there's a lot of other places that you can find either mutual interest or something that helps both the utility provider and us, like an efficiency program. Is that a good intro?
Yeah, great. And so, tell us a little bit more some of your experiences in particularly overcoming, working with your city leadership, your city council, even your community to articulate why work is important, and how what's the process been to help overcome some of the barriers that you may have experienced in kind of the questions of why should we be doing this? Why should we be investing? Why should we be using your time or your team's time
Yeah.
to engage in these conversations?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to have a perfect answer for you, but I think, as I mentioned, having the climate action roadmap as like a central point of discussion, it really helps, at least when we're talking about things like, why are we going to develop a cost premium for solar PPA for some of our city facilities that's going to cost us more money but give us cleaner energy? And I think some of it is selling like the long game, where over time we're seeing that these rates are increasing, we're seeing that utilities are increasingly strained, and it is something that's going to help pay off both in resiliency and in cost. So I think that's something that like we've looked at. Another piece I think that everyone's feeling in city government is we get a lot of resident feedback all of the time about utility affordability. And it's something that's on everyone's minds, especially in Boise. We're one of the fastest growing cities in the country. We are experiencing a very high electric utility demand. And we also see a lot of, like you can see my background, it's very dry. So wildfires and grid reliability is a big concern. And so I think pointing to places that the city is spending money to actually help with some of these affordability issues has been really helpful, because it helps, with leadership. They can then point to specific things when they're talking to constituents. And I think that's something that like everyone knows is important. It's like it affects us as well. So I think I don't have to do so much selling because we're all pretty much aligned on the climate action roadmap, but some of the more like costly things are a bit more of a challenge. I think capital cost is also a really big issue for us at this point.
Great, and thank you. Now, Heather, why don't we shift over to you here for a moment? Charlotte's been engaging in North Carolina's, Public Utility Commission cases for some time now, and particularly relative to Duke Energy's integrated resource planning process, over the course of actually, I think now maybe 7, 8 years and, in history, you'll have to correct me on that. And you've done so and sometimes in partnership with other North Carolina communities. So can you share the importance of that body of work, engaging in particularly the integrated resource plan or maybe others for Charlotte? Have you found importance relative to other city priorities and making that alignment and selling that opportunity? And then how have you done so in partnership with many of your other North Carolina communities?
Yeah, Katie, Bill likes to pile on the questions on you, doesn't he? So, so I would say, just to start with, Charlotte is one of the fastest growing cities in the nation, and that comes along with a lot of challenges and opportunities. I think that, just realizing, first off, just to go back for a second and talk about our history with Duke Energy. First of all, Duke is one of our largest employers in Charlotte. They are headquartered here, and so that is a huge piece of this. I think that, in the past, we really have just taken on the role of customer. So, for example, all of our street lighting is Duke owned and maintained. We lease the lighting. And so, and there have been some small projects with Duke, for example, like a microgrid project at a firehouse, and small things with our, our building services, specifically around energy management. But there wasn't like this broad brush partnership with Duke. And I think that, the realization of the fact that the city is one of the largest customers that Duke has, and the power that has just in our municipal operations, and then to take into account, of course, the impact of our whole population is huge. And I just think that, obviously, Bill, you talked about the fact that public servants, our goal is to improve the quality of life of our residents. And so we're looking for every way to do that. And so just like Katie talked about with, making sure that we are, representing those that can't represent themselves, is really important. And in terms of like why our decisions on intervening at the Utilities Commission versus potentially, other places. We also have talked about in this webinar about priorities of your organization, right? And so what we see as, really the priority for us, where we can make the most progress, is at the Utilities Commission versus, legislative types of engagement. And our intergovernmental relations, really has a very wide breadth of priorities. And so we have to look where we could make the most movement. And for us, it's at the Utilities Commission. One part of that is because actually the legislature gave a lot of that responsibility over to the Utilities Commission. And so that's really where a lot of the decisions are made, at least up until this summer. But that's another topic for another time. And so that's really where we have found the most importance. I would say that, and Katie underlined, it is really important to have the connection to council adopted plans. So, our strategic energy action plan, which is our climate action plan, has the goal of becoming a zero carbon city by 2050. How do we meet those goals? We cannot do it without Duke Energy. And so having that in our back pocket and to say, we are partnering with Duke in all of these ways. We actually have a memorandum of understanding with Duke Energy that we started after we did our climate action plan, that really set the framework for us. And, as Katie was talking about, we find those places where we have mutual benefit, and that, that really helps. Just really like, and also, engaging really helps. Just raise your hand and say, we're interested. We want to participate. You have a program, you're thinking about a program. Let's tell you how to make it better. Let's tell you how that it can really resonate with residents and be successful, instead of they're going into a closet and cooking something up, So I think there's, just so many benefits of it.
And so Heather, or maybe Katie, that last point you made, Heather, that raising your hand and acknowledging that you're an interested party, it is very important. And could you expand on a little bit? What has been the result of, you noted, ability to contribute to, program design, for example, that benefits your communities. But I imagine there's other benefits that have come about by way of saying, listen, we are an important voice here. We are critical to the choices and the decisions you're making. And that we want to be party to that, and historically we might not have been, but now we are here and we love to be, a part and parcel with these conversations. Can you discuss like what have been the benefits, just not just like in the cases that you've participated in, but more broadly, how does that play out with moving the needle, so to speak, for your communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for example, the raising our hand part, I really believe got us our high energy use assistance pilot program, which is basically, we talked to Duke about how we could work together, and the city is basically paying for the health and safety upgrades for residents, for low income residents, so that Duke can then come in and provide the funding for the energy efficiency upgrades for those places that could not happen if they didn't have those health and safety upgrades. And so I really, so for every $1 that the city spends, Duke Energy spends $4. And so that's a huge benefit for our residents and for the city. And it also helps Duke because they're having a successful program. They can, show that to the commission. And so I really do believe that was an outcome of us raising our hand.
Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit too with some examples from Boise, like a small and a large example. We raised our hand and we said we have these clean energy goals and we would like to look for a way to have some sort of PPA for clean energy for two of our largest electricity users. We have an airport and a wastewater treatment plant. And so through that collaboration, we were actually able to get like a separate tariff for a solar array that was built, but for our participation, that now provides energy to like 30% of municipal facilities. So that was like a really big win that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't said, hey, we're actually interested in this offering. But then like another thing is, just recently I was reached out to by someone from Idaho Power that was saying, hey, we're developing some of these incentives for electric heat pumps. And we know based on our collaboration in the past that you guys do a lot of work with this through your electrification work. Would you like to provide some feedback on these incentives? And so it's like, there's like, again, the very legal like intervention piece where you have to raise your hand and say, yes, I'm interested. But then there's also the day-to-day things that you might include your facilities manager or your capital planning manager. And then just one other thing to Heather's point, I think when you intervene in these rate cases, at least for us, we try to intervene in like anything, like I said, that touches those three goals. And sometimes it's to say, hey, we really like this offering. Please continue to do more of this. We intervened in two filings recently that were looking to expand clean energy programs. And then there's places where we sort of have to agree to disagree with the utility. Like we definitely aren't going to agree on like the solar export credit rate, but that's okay. We can have our own perspectives. it kind of like builds the relationship, because we were also saying like, hey, great job on these other things, and we think this is a really good path, and we understand you're constrained, we're constrained. So I think,
Yeah, it is really important, Katie, that's exactly right. It is really important to celebrate the things that they are doing right, and telling them, saying thank you for these great programs.
yeah,
And and so even on the the energy efficiency programs that we use like in the city, Duke has a great Smart Saver incentive program for new construction that, they have a contractor that does the whole thing for us, and helps us like make decisions on better equipment and everything. And so I absolutely take those surveys when they call, right? to say, yes, this is a great program. Let's keep this up. So
Well, so we have a number of questions coming in from
ooh,
the audience. Yeah, so this is great. And so wanted to focus on maybe one or two here. We're running out of time, unfortunately, but this is such a fascinating conversation, and luckily we have a full webinar series coming forward to talk some about these strategies and the tactics and the means of engaging both directly and indirectly. So for those who are fascinated and quite interested in a lot of the experience and wisdom you bring, there's a whole body of webinars be forthcoming that we'd love to kind of pick your brain and learn from you all. So with that said, one of our audience members brings forward the question. We've talked a little bit about this. There were some reasons why you raised your hands individually for engaging in some of these processes. But was there a certain catalyst event that really was critical for engaging in whatever, again, would have been a rate case or something that was just extremely consequential and where you couldn't not engage on behalf of your community or local government interests? Did something that occur for either one of you?
I mean, I think it was I think it was just a timing thing for us, right? I mean, Duke Energy was, they had a goal of zero carbon by 2050, right? And so they were working on their integrated resource plan. Um, and, you know, we just want to make sure they get there, right? So we're gonna, we had just we kind of honestly, the city and Duke sort of made our goals around the same time, and it just sort of aligned in that way. And I think, we were very lucky to be an American Cities Climate Challenge city. At that time, we had additional resources like WRI to help us get educated on, all things regulatory that we didn't have, the capacity for or the education on before. So that really helped us equip ourselves to move forward with those sorts of things. And it was a big process, right? I mean, actually, I the some of the maybe easiest part was actually getting it through council. It was just it's all the like front end stuff of like getting it your language right. And I saw in the survey that not many people were that worried about explaining the difficult concepts to non-experts. So I guess y'all agree that it's not that hard, but you have to like prepare that in such a way that it's like easy to consume for
yeah.
them, and show them how it aligns with their policy. That's critical.
We didn't have a catalyst event per se, but I think one of the things that, I don't know what Charlotte's like, but everything you've described, Heather, sounds very similar to Boise. And it's a diverse political city. So there's people with a lot of different opinions. But one thing that people really like coalesce around is when we have these really bad wildfire summers, and people can really see how that affects their health, their recreational ability, and also like their power, because it has a big impact on that. And so I think that's something that we have seen will move people to action, not necessarily towards like a climate goal, for instance, but people are really concerned about resilience or grid reliability and affordability. So I think it's been more of like a slow burn of all these things that have kind of piled up. But last summer definitely was a really bad fire summer, and I think that really kicked off a lot of like resident engagement and some more of these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. And again, just to kind of put a finer point on that is to say, it sounds like leveraging, again, community priorities, your existing plans in really kind of focusing on where you can make progress against challenges your community is facing is really kind of critical to selling and to ultimately, giving you support to engage in these particular conversations. We have one more question. We are running out of time, but the question is, often local governments do not have adequate resources, be it that of staff or in-house expertise, to effectively participate in the planning process or in these engagement opportunities. Just given your experiences, rather than each local government participating individually, can local governments articulate their needs and viewpoints through, let's say, their associations? I'm assuming like a municipal league or similar, or Katie, in your context, you're pretty out there on your own, building partnerships or coalitions with other community organizations. Do you have any experience and how that overcomes some of the barriers to engagement?
I think capacity is always an issue in local government. And I think with a lot of these things, my perception is that people are often afraid that they don't have the expertise to get involved. And we do work a lot with local organizations. I think in the absence, as funding goes away, it's really important for the local governments to find those local business partners and people who are already doing programs that we can uplift. And so that's been something that I've been working on doing. I'll also just put it out there that I wasn't always like a regulatory or utility expert. And when I started my job, I went to a training on rate design, and there was so many people there. There was a commissioner. There were people from legal parts of government. There were people in my similar role, and I think like there's a lot of people who don't have all the answers, and there are so many resources that can help you get involved in the different like touch points that you're looking to get involved in. So it doesn't always have to be like someone directly from your legal team with specific rate case design expertise, if you do want to like be involved in that space.
Yeah, I would just add, for those in the Southeast, SSDN, and then Urban Sustainability Directors Network is huge.
Yes.
When we decided to start really doing this, engaging with our utility, we started a North Carolina group, and then that grew into SSDN, realizing that we were really moving in that space, and we ended up partnering with the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. So they're like our policy partner to help us stay up to date educationally. So yes, reach out.
Well, we are running out of time here. Again, we could continue the discussion on for another hour or two and not longer, but obviously we don't have that much time. And so with that said, I just want to thank you both very graciously for your time and wisdom and experience and sharing that amongst so many local governments professionals who are either doing this work or seeking to do this work. And it's just vitally important to hear experience and the precedent that you all are setting for local governments across the United States. So with that said, I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you. With that said, I also wanted to pass it back to our colleague, Lacey Shaver, to close out our webinar and give us some information on next steps and forthcoming webinar opportunities.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Katie, for all that wonderful insight. Just a few items of wrap up. Next slide. We could have considered this, continue this conversation for at least another hour or two. Luckily, this is the first webinar in a series. Our next one is tentatively titled Power Moves, Local Government Strategy. for utility and PUC collaboration. So we're going to start getting into the nuts and bolts of how you actually align your goals with different engagement opportunities and build that internal capacity. So save the date for Tuesday, October 7th. We will send out information to everyone who registered to this webinar so that you'll have it for the next one. Next slide. And just a note, this is part of a broader project that WRI is doing, helping local governments and communities to engage. So right now we're talking to leading local governments, getting a state of play, and we're going to be using all of that information and information from the polls today to develop resources, education, frameworks for how you actually start making decisions on how to engage. So more to come. I'm really happy to have you involved. And if you have questions, next slide. We've got contact information for myself and Bill. So reach out if you're like, this sounds great. Can you help me? Please ping us. We're happy to help join in. You can also sign up for our newsletter here. Last but not least, we are at time. We had one last poll. If you are still with us, we would love to hear from you. As our last slide here, what is the single most important area where your local government would like to improve its engagement in state PUC or energy regulatory proceedings over the next 1 or 2 years? Like I said, we're taking all this information to help shape the programming and education and resources based on what local governments need right now. So this is super helpful for us. And we'll share these results after the webinar, along with the slides and the recording so that you can come back. All right, well, as these results come in, I just want to thank you one more time for taking time out of your busy day in August in the summer to join us and talk about the wonky topic of regulatory proceedings and engaging, but it's so important. We're really grateful for you and thank you for your time, and we'll be back in touch with the follow-up materials. So take care, everyone, and thanks again.